Hey everyone, I wanted to come on, hopefully be quick, but I don't think it'll be quick. If you know me, I'm long-winded, but I'm gonna try. I wanted to tell you about something that happened this week in regards to title fraud and about how our sweet buyers were this close to losing nearly $200,000 in cash. So back in November, we went under contract on this property with our buyers, and they did everything right. They deposited their earnest money, they paid option money, they purchased a new survey, which is what the contract had on it. And so everything was going great. When it came time for the HOA documents to be ordered, there's a cost to that. And so the seller had signed documents stating that they would pay for that. Well, when the title company reached out to tell the seller it was time he needed to call the HOA company, he said, "I'm not paying for those." And so we said, "Well, that's what you signed. That's part of the contract. You signed and said you would pay for those." And he said he wasn't going to. So we went back and forth with the other agent, and finally the other agent ended up paying for them. I guess the seller told her he would reimburse her at closing. So anyway, so fast forward and we get to Wednesday, the 10th of December. And on Wednesday, we were supposed to close escrow on this property. We find out on Wednesday that the documents had not been returned back to the title company with his notarized signature on them. And so we started inquiring why. And so they said, "Well, no, we closed the property today, but we're not going to fund it until Friday." And we said, "No, we're closing and funding on the same day. That's how this is going to work. And so now we need to extend the closing date to Friday." So after some back and forth and a little bit of ghosting on the seller's part, we got the listing agent got the seller to sign the amendment to change the closing date to today. So then yesterday, just some extra red flags started to pop up. So we find out, which we didn't know, is we find out that the documents were emailed from the title company directly to the seller. And then the seller, quote unquote, hired his own notary or took them somewhere to have them notarized. And then they were going to be sent back. Well, this seller on the appraisal district, his address is California. And so when we looked at the tracking, the documents were coming from Washington. And so we thought, well, that's kind of strange. Why are they coming out of Washington? Are they traveling? So we thought, well, that's kind of weird. And so we notified the title company yesterday that they were not to release that money, which was almost $200,000. They were not to release that money until the buyer authorized them to release the money. In other words, not to wire it, because once it's wired, it's gone. And so the documents came back this morning. The title company looked at them. There was only one thing notarized. Everything else needed to be notarized, and it wasn't. And it was just kind of a hot mess. And so, of course, all of our feelings were starting to come to fruition. Like, we just kind of had a feeling that something wasn't right. And so it was starting to feel like it was coming true, that this was some kind of fraud. And yesterday I had spent some time trying to get a hold of the seller, looking up their address, looking them up through some various apps and websites that we have that we can look to try and verify. And things were matching up digitally or there, but they weren't matching up. Just the feeling wasn't matching up to what was actually happening. So they get the documents back. The documents are a hot mess. So the title company said, "We're not going to close this file until the seller gets on a remote online notary with them." And anyway, so he refused to do it. He said, I'm not doing it again. Forget it. I'll just cancel the transaction." Well, if you're in real estate, you know that's not how that works. And so he wouldn't get on the Zoom, et cetera, et cetera. So I said to the title company, "Why don't you look at the notary stamp, find out or get the name off the notary stamp, call that notary." So the title company pulled the name of the notary, contacted the notary. That notary did not sign these people. So she said that her stamp has been used before, meaning somebody was able to get her notary number, created their own notary stamp, whatever, got her notary stamp, pretended to be a notary, notarized the documents and did them wrong. So that's the upside to this. Did them wrong and sent them back. So once we found that out, we knew it was fraud. And so the title company is releasing all that money back to the buyer, but it was so close. And I'm so glad that Spidey Sense kind of, was there for all of us. Well, for Ryder Rodriguez, who was the buyer's agent, I'm the team leader. So his Spidey Sense was up, my Spidey Sense was up, and the buyer, her and her husband, they were feeling the same way. So anyways, it could have been very, very bad, and the money would have just been gone. The other thing is for agents out there, agents and sellers, but agents, if you get a phone call from a seller who doesn't live in the area and they say, we want you to list our vacant property, you have to do every single thing you possibly can to try and verify them. I always make people send me the front and back of their driver's license. I make them get on a Zoom call with me. We don't just blindly accept the fact that they are the owner of that property. I've had it happen to me twice. Somebody calling me, asking me to list their property. The moment I tell them to get on a Zoom call, they disappear. So obviously they were fraudulent, right? A client of mine who I helped them purchase a couple of lots a few years ago. Their lot has tried to be listed twice by another agent, 2 different agents who were super smart and called me and said, something doesn't feel right about this. Your client called me and asked me to list their lot, which made me go and contact my client and said, hey, did you call another agent to list? And he said, no, I didn't do that. That's not me. So we were able to stop it those 2 times. Well, about 2 months ago, the last agent didn't make that phone call, and I'm not saying it's her fault, but, didn't make that phone call. And they ended up listing it. So she paid all that money in photography and video and all of that and listed the lot. He noticed his lot pop up on Zillow. He called me and said, I just saw my lot get listed on Zillow. So I called her right away and said, hey, he's not the seller, anyway. And she said to me, she goes, something didn't feel right about that. And I said, well, you got to follow your gut. You have to do everything you can to make sure that who you're talking to is who it really is. The other thing that this guy did this week is that he chose his own title company, which is fine. Sellers can choose their own title company. However, he chose some tiny little no-name title company we had never heard of. And so, that kind of got us watching things a little bit more closely. And he was probably targeting them, knowing that they probably had some less checks and balances in place. And so when you have an agent who recommends a title company to you, take that to heart, because they've probably closed a lot of properties with that title company and they trust them. This title company they didn't know this guy. He clearly didn't know them. And so he could have, they were about to let this transaction go through until, we all started to kind of make a stink about it. So anyways, so there was all kinds of red flags. So you go with your gut every time. Make sure that you are talking to who you're talking to. Make sure that the title company knows what they're doing. Be on top of everything all the time, dates, deadlines, everything that you can. And the moment you sense anything that just feels off, it probably is. So keep that in mind and have a great weekend. Bye.